I never thought something as simple as grabbing a coffee would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning, unusually quiet. I left the house a little earlier than usual. Nora was still upstairs getting ready, and I figured I'd beat traffic for once. It wasn't a bad morning. Clear skies, crisp air, nothing to complain about. I remember thinking I'd stop at the cafe near her office, the one she mentioned a few times but we'd never gone to together. I had no real reason, just a passing thought. Something about the quiet made me feel like sitting with a cup of coffee before work. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at a corner table by the window, the morning light catching her just right. Like a photo you take without meaning to, and it ends up your favorite. She was dressed sharp, in that soft green blouse I'd complimented weeks ago. Back then, she said she wore it for me. Now, I wasn't so sure. First, I smiled. I thought, what a coincidence. Maybe I'd walk in and surprise her. Say something corny like, "So this is where the cool people go." But I stopped before I even reached the door. Something about the way she looked, it made me hesitate. She was laughing. Not in the polite, distracted way you do when reading some work message. It was deeper than that, warm, familiar. Her eyes never left the screen of her phone, and the smile she gave it. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time. She looked like someone else in that moment. The cafe was quiet, so I walked in and kept my head low, not wanting to be seen. I grabbed a seat in the far corner, hidden enough to observe but close enough to see the expression on her face. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that maybe she was talking to a coworker or watching some viral video. But no one watches a meme and gently bites their lip afterward. No one texts their colleague at 8:15 in the morning and pauses between replies like they're savoring the moment. She was completely absorbed, oblivious. Her coffee sat untouched, growing cold. She typed something quickly, then stared at the screen like she was waiting for oxygen. When a message popped up, her entire face changed. That glow you can't fake. That soft flush in your cheeks when someone says exactly what you want to hear. I knew that look. I used to be the one who caused it. Not anymore, apparently. I should have walked out then, but I stayed. For 20 minutes, I sat there, pretending to look at my phone, nursing a coffee I didn't even want, watching my wife fall in love with her screen. Eventually, she glanced at the time, blinked hard like she'd just remembered where she was, and quickly gathered her things. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and left without even noticing me. I didn't follow her. I sat there long after she'd gone, trying to decide if I had just imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew better. That night, I mentioned it casually. Said she seemed distracted that morning. I asked if everything was okay, if work was piling up or if she'd had a rough start to the day. She barely looked up from her laptop. "Yeah," she said with a sigh. "It's just been a lot lately." I asked if she stopped by the cafe near her building. She raised an eyebrow just slightly. "Oh yeah, for like 5 minutes. I needed caffeine." That was it. No elaboration, no mention of running into anyone, or sitting for nearly half an hour. Just 5 minutes. She didn't ask how I knew. She didn't seem curious at all. I stared at her for a beat too long. She must have noticed because she smiled, tired but sweet. "Evan, please don't overthink today. I'm just stressed." I nodded slowly. "Okay." She went back to typing. And that was the moment I knew. Not new, not with evidence, but in that deep, soul-level way where your gut starts whispering truths your brain doesn't want to hear. It wasn't just the laugh or the glow or how she lied with a softness that made it feel like care instead of deception. It was the fact that she lied so easily, as if it was normal, as if I wouldn't notice, as if she'd done it before. The next morning, I watched her a little more closely as we both got ready. She was humming to herself in the mirror, curling the ends of her hair just a little more than usual. Her phone buzzed once. She glanced at it, locked it, and flipped it face down on the counter. I asked who it was, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Just Madison," she said, naming a coworker I'd never met in person. "She's checking in on something." I nodded, but I knew. I didn't know the name. I didn't know the story. But I knew that message wasn't about work. Later that week, I dropped by her office with lunch, something I used to do all the time. I texted her from the lobby, and she came down looking surprised, happy but guarded. We sat outside and made small talk. She kept glancing at her phone. At one point, she reached for it, then seemed to stop herself. I asked if everything was okay. She smiled. Totally. Just work stuff. Always work stuff. But there was this moment, right as we stood up to leave, when she hugged me and I caught a faint whiff of her perfume. Not the one she wore for our date nights. A new one. One I'd never smelled before. Something floral, expensive, not quite her usual taste. You smell different, I said. Oh yeah, I got a new bottle. Just felt like switching things up. There was a pause. She didn't look me in the eyes when she said it. Looks good on you, I said. Thanks, she replied. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Back in the car, I sat there for a while before starting the engine. It's hard to describe what it's like when something you've built your whole life around starts to show cracks. Hairline fractures at first. You squint, you shake your head, you tell yourself it's nothing. But once you see them, you can't unsee them. And I was starting to see them everywhere. I replayed that morning in the cafe over and over in my head for the rest of the week. The angle of her body. The way she leaned toward her phone like it was pulling her in. The way she checked the time and looked momentarily guilty, like she knew she'd gone too far. I kept trying to convince myself I was reading too much into it. That maybe she was just venting to a friend. Maybe she needed some levity. Maybe I was the one who hadn't been paying enough attention, and she was just drifting because I let her. But that's the thing about trust. Once the doubt creeps in, it spreads fast. And the worst part isn't the suspicion itself. It's how quickly your mind adapts to the idea that everything might be a lie. By Sunday night, I found myself hesitating before asking even simple things. I'd catch myself wondering, is she telling the truth? When she said she was tired, is she really texting Madison? When she smiled at her phone during dinner, it was like watching someone I knew slowly become a stranger. And the scariest part was, she didn't seem to notice at all. After that morning in the cafe, nothing looked the same. It wasn't like I suddenly turned into a private investigator or started snooping through her things. That came later. At first, it was more subtle. A shift in how I paid attention. A voice in the back of my mind that refused to shut up. I kept trying to tell myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just being paranoid. But then the memories started adding up, one by one. It was like my brain had opened a folder labeled, stuff you ignored at the time. And suddenly everything inside it made perfect sense. Moments I'd brushed off before began replaying in slow motion. Every glance, every excuse, every delayed text. It all started forming a pattern I could no longer pretend not to see. It began with her phone. Nora had always been pretty casual about it. She'd leave it charging in the kitchen, face up, no lock screen. We used to share playlists, even read each other's group chats sometimes. Nothing secretive. Then, around 4 or 5 months ago, that changed. Her phone started living with her. It followed her into every room. The bathroom, the laundry room, even outside to take out the trash. And it was always face down, always on silent. I noticed the change without really noticing it. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a new work habit. But now, looking back, it felt like one of the first signs. I remember this one night in particular. We were watching a movie together, some rom-com she had picked. Halfway through, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, tensed, and reached for it like it was on fire. Didn't even read the message in front of me. Just swiped it away, locked the screen, and set it down again, face down. I asked, "Everything okay?" She nodded a little too quickly. "Just something from work. Don't worry about it." But she didn't press play again. She didn't even pretend to watch. She just stared at the screen with this far-off look in her eyes, like her body was in the living room but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The movie kept playing. I don't think either of us saw the ending. Then there were the late nights. First, I understood. Nora worked in marketing, and things got hectic around quarterly reviews and product launches. I knew her team sometimes pulled long hours. She'd call around 6 or 7, saying she had to stay behind to help finish up a deck or rehearse for a client pitch. I believed her. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? But the excuses started sounding familiar. Too familiar. Always the same phrasing. We're ordering in. Shouldn't be too late. Don't wait up. It started to feel like she was reading off a script. The real kicker came one Thursday night. She was supposed to meet a friend. Some girl named Hannah she used to work with. She left the house dressed in what I can only describe as subtle effort. A black blouse that dipped just low enough, heels instead of flats, hair pinned up, perfume I hadn't smelled since our anniversary dinner. I remember leaning in to hug her before she left, and something about the hug felt rehearsed, like she was doing it for my benefit. A performance. Have fun, I said. I'll try, she replied, giving me a soft smile before heading out the door. It was almost midnight when she got back. I was still on the couch, the TV playing quietly in the background. She walked in barefoot, heels in hand, cheeks flushed. She looked good. Too good for someone who supposedly just had drinks with a friend from HR. How was it? I asked. She paused like she was trying to remember what the story was. Oh, fun. Catching up. Nothing exciting. Where'd you guys go? That place near Midtown. The wine bar with the outdoor patio. Funny thing is, we'd been there together. Twice. And it doesn't have outdoor seating. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Cool. She went upstairs. Took the longest shower of her life. From that point on, it got harder to ignore the cracks. I started noticing how she was dressing in the mornings. Not every day, but certain days. Like clockwork. Days when she'd suddenly pick out her best blazer. Actually iron her pants. Curl her hair a little. Spritz on that expensive perfume she told me she was saving for special occasions. I'd ask, big meeting today? Just want to look nice, she'd say casually. Who for? I tried to joke once. She laughed, but not in a funny way, in a you're so silly kind of way. Then she kissed my cheek and left before I could say anything else. Around that time, she started canceling things. We'd planned a weekend trip to the lake, something we'd talked about for months. Just the two of us, hiking trails, no cell service. She backed out last minute. Said her department got slammed, and she had to help cover for someone on maternity leave. I offered to reschedule. She told me not to bother. I don't want you waiting around for me, she said, with that tired, noble tone she used when trying to look like the hero. A few weeks later, she had an overnight at a conference across the state. I remember texting her goodnight, and she didn't reply until almost 3 a.m. Just, sorry, just now seeing this. Exhausted. Love you. The text sounded like her, but it didn't feel like her. It was all becoming a blur. Late nights, locked phone, vague answers, changing routines. And worst of all, she wasn't even mean about it. That's what made it harder to pin down. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. Still brought home takeout sometimes. Still sat on the couch with me and watched Netflix, laughing at the same shows we used to love. It all looked like a marriage on the surface, but it felt like we were playing roles, like we were pretending, saying the lines, hitting our marks, hoping no one noticed the distance between us kept growing wider. Then came the weirdest moment of all. We were getting ready for bed, her brushing her teeth, me scrolling on my phone, and she got a text. Her phone buzzed on the counter, screen lighting up just enough for me to catch the name. It said, Chris camera with flash. I didn't recognize it. Never heard her mention a Chris before. And the camera emoji? I don't know. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. She saw me glance at it. Oh, just someone from the agency, she said, too fast. We're redoing the hedge *TS for the team. I nodded. She didn't offer more. She didn't have to. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she slept next to me. Or pretended to. I couldn't tell anymore. The silence between us was deafening. And I realized, with a kind of dull sadness, that I no longer knew how to ask her the hard questions. When did that happen? When did I become afraid of the answer? I started avoiding home more than usual, staying late at work, running unnecessary errands, going for long drives with no destination. Just anything to avoid walking into a house that used to feel like ours but now felt like a stranger's. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Proof? A confession? Some kind of emotional collapse that would force everything into the open? But none of that came. What came instead was a slow, creeping awareness that I was losing her, and that I'd probably already lost her long before I ever noticed. It's one thing to suspect, to connect the dots in your head, to trace the pattern forming behind someone's words, their gestures, their routine. But it's another thing entirely to see it, to watch the truth unfold with your own eyes and know, without doubt, without denial, that your world is not what you thought it was. That moment came on a rainy Thursday night. I remember because I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her office that evening. I'd wrapped up work early, sat in my car outside the building just to avoid going home to another quiet night of takeout and reruns. I hadn't planned anything. I didn't even know why I drove across town. I guess I was looking for something, confirmation, closure, or maybe just the final crack in the glass. Nora had told me she had to stay late for a team presentation. It was one of those vague, we're all staying late kind of things. She said it so casually, like it was just another late night, another work grind. I'll probably be home around 10, she'd said that morning, without even looking up from her coffee. But something in her voice had been off. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Not really. Her tone was flat, too neutral, like she was saying lines in a play she'd rehearsed 100 times before. It didn't sound like someone explaining her schedule to her husband. It sounded like someone covering her tracks. That's what drove me to follow her that night. I sat outside the building, watching the entrance from a side street. The rain was coming down steady, fogging up my windshield, blurring the world outside like a dream I didn't want to be in. I kept telling myself maybe this would prove me wrong. Maybe she really was just working. Maybe I was the one twisting things in my head. But at 8:47 p.m., Nora walked out of the building, and not alone. She was with someone. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, early 30s maybe, wearing a fitted coat and that easy, relaxed smile I used to wear when I stood beside her. They weren't walking like co-workers. They weren't walking like friends. They were walking like a couple. He had his hand around her waist, comfortably, like it had been there many times before. She didn't pull away, didn't glance around nervously. If anything, she looked comfortable, confident, like she belonged there, like she'd walked out of that building with him before. They stopped by his car, a dark blue Audi. I watched from a half-block away, my heart in my throat, breath shallow, pulse thudding in my ears. And then they kissed. Not a quick kiss, not an impulsive mistake. It was slow, familiar, deliberate. Her hands were on his chest. His hands cradled the back of her head. They leaned into each other like the world didn't exist. And in that moment, mine stopped. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anything at first. Just stillness. A kind of emotional paralysis that took over my entire body. Like my brain couldn't compute what I was seeing. Like it had tried for so long to deny it that, when the truth arrived, it short-circuited. She pulled back first, said something I couldn't hear, and smiled. That smile wrecked me. It wasn't the one she gave me when I surprised her with flowers or remembered an inside joke. It was the one she gave when she was with someone who saw her in the way she wanted to be seen. Someone who wasn't me. They got into the car, and I watched the taillights disappear into the night. I sat in my car for what must have been an hour, maybe more. Just sitting there, engine off, windshield fogging up, the rain still tapping against the glass like some cruel metronome counting down the seconds since my life split in two. There was no ambiguity now. No more guessing or wondering if I was reading too much into things. No more overanalyzing phone calls or second-guessing canceled plans. The questions were gone. Only answers remained. Ugly, undeniable answers. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a relationship. Ongoing. Mate. Established. And I wasn't a part of it. When I finally started the car and drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even think. It was like I had left my body and was watching myself from outside. Everything felt quiet. Too quiet. like the emotional volume had been turned down to zero. I walked into the house and looked around like it was someone else's home. Her shoes by the door, her coat draped over the chair, her half-empty mug still sitting in the sink. Everything exactly as she left it. And yet, everything had changed. She came home around 10:15 p.m. Just like she said. Smelled like rain and that same perfume I'd once bought her as a gift. I was sitting on the couch, lights off, TV playing low, pretending to be half asleep. She dropped her bag by the door, let out a sigh, and padded into the kitchen. I heard the fridge open, the clink of a water bottle, the soft shuffle of her footsteps across the hardwood. Then she walked into the living room. "Hey," she said gently. "Still up? Couldn't sleep?" I mumbled. She smiled soft, tired. "It was a long one. I'm beat." I nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't sit down, just stood there for a moment waiting, maybe for a question, maybe for a confrontation, but I didn't give her one. After a pause, she leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "Love you." I didn't answer, and she didn't seem to notice. She went upstairs, showered, got into bed. The disconnect between the life she was pretending to live and the life I had just witnessed. It was staggering. And yet, she moved through it like nothing was wrong. That was what broke me more than the kiss, more than the touch, more than the lies. It was the ease with which she came home to me after being in his arms. The casual way she walked into our house, kissed my head, climbed into our bed, and wrapped herself in the illusion we'd both been living in for too long. That was the moment I realized the affair wasn't a threat to our marriage. It was her marriage. I was the outsider now. She had already crossed the line. She wasn't slipping. She wasn't tempted. She wasn't confused. She was gone. Emotionally, mentally, physically, gone. And I was still here, holding the pieces, watching the ghost of the woman I loved move through the shell of the life we built together. I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe beside me, wondering who she dreamed about, wondering how long I'd been the other man in my own home. The next morning, she got up like everything was normal, made coffee, asked me if I wanted eggs, told me to drive safe on my way to work. All smiles and sleepy affection. I watched her pour cream into her mug and stir it slowly, like nothing had changed. But everything had. And from that point on, I stopped asking questions, because I already knew the answers. I thought there would be a moment when everything exploded. Confrontation, raised voices, accusations flying across the room. That's how it always looks in movies, how people expect it to happen. The betrayed husband loses control, demands answers, slams doors, forces the truth out into the open. But none of that came. What came instead was silence. Not the awkward kind, not the passive-aggressive kind. The kind that settles in once you already know everything and no longer need to ask. After that night in the rain, after watching her walk into someone else's arms, and then come home to mine like nothing had happened, something inside me shut down. Not broke, shut down. Like a switch flipped from emotion to survival. The next morning, I didn't confront her. I didn't mention the building, the car, the kiss. I sat across from her at the kitchen table while she drank her coffee and scrolled through her phone. She asked if I wanted toast. I said no. She told me she had another long day ahead. I nodded. She looked relieved. That's when I realized something important. She was expecting a reaction. Maybe not that day, but eventually. She was braced for anger, tears, questions she'd have to dodge. She was prepared to manage my pain the same way she'd been managing her lies. And I decided I wasn't going to give her that. Not because I was trying to be strong. Not because I was planning revenge. But because the truth had already stripped her of her power over me. There was nothing left to negotiate. I went to work like normal, answered emails, sat in meetings, even laughed at a joke someone made during lunch. It all felt distant, like I was watching myself go through the motions from behind glass. But it worked. I stayed functional. When I got home that evening, she was already there, cooking dinner. Music played softly from her phone. She smiled when she saw me, asked how my day was. Fine, I said. She watched me closely as I set my bag down, like she was searching for cracks. I didn't give her any. I ate the dinner she made, complimented it even, told her thank you. That confused her more than anger ever would have. Over the next few days I stayed calm. Too calm. I didn't ask where she was going when she left. Didn't question her late nights. Didn't touch her phone when it buzzed. She started filling the silence herself. Work's been insane, she said one night, unprompted. I nodded. Sounds like it. Another time. We might have another overnight coming up. I'll let you know. Okay. Every response short, neutral, devoid of emotion. Inside, I was doing something else entirely. I was observing. I watched how easily she slipped between versions of herself. The version that laughed with me on the couch. The version that disappeared into her phone. The version that kissed my cheek before leaving the house, already halfway gone. I watched how she never asked if I was okay. Not once. That told me everything I needed to know. If she had felt even a fraction of guilt, she would have checked. She would have sensed the distance and tried to bridge it. Instead, she adapted. She adjusted to the new dynamic as if this version of our marriage, quiet, detached, emotionally hollow, was acceptable to her. That was the real betrayal. One night, she climbed into bed and reached for me. Not urgently, not passionately, just enough to maintain the illusion. Her hand rested on my chest like it had 100 times before. I stayed still. After a moment, she pulled away and turned onto her side. I'm tired, she said. Yeah, I replied. She fell asleep quickly. I didn't. Lying there in the dark, I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken in the way I thought I'd be. I was clear. Clear in a way I'd never been before. This wasn't something that needed discussion. There was nothing to fix. No misunderstanding to resolve. She had already made her choice, and she was living it comfortably. All I was doing now was deciding how long I'd let myself exist inside the aftermath. The calm wasn't denial. It wasn't avoidance. It was preparation. I started mentally organizing things. Not logistics yet, just conclusions. Final answers to questions I'd been asking myself for months. Did she love me? Not enough. Would she stop? No. Would she tell me the truth on her own? Never. Once I accepted those things, the noise inside my head finally went quiet. And for the first time since all of this began, I slept. Not because I was at peace, but because I had stopped fighting reality. After the silence came the numbness. The kind that settles into your bones. The kind that doesn't announce itself with tears or shouting. Just a slow dulling of everything you used to feel. The truth was out. Not spoken, but known. I had seen her with him. I knew. And she knew something in me had changed, even if I hadn't said the words out loud. But neither of us said anything. Instead, we slipped into a kind of limbo, a quiet, choreographed dance of pretending. We lived in the same space, shared the same bed, used the same kitchen, but it wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a ceasefire, a neutral agreement to not ask, not confront, not feel. It was remarkable, really, how easy it was to pretend when both people were invested in not facing the truth. Mornings stayed the same, at least on the surface. She'd make coffee. I'd grab mine and sit in the same chair I always did, scrolling through the news, pretending to care. She'd talk about her schedule, meetings, calls, a client visit, and I'd nod at the right times. Once or twice, she tried to ask about mine, and I'd give her vague answers. Same stuff, I'd say. You know how it is. We'd move around each other like roommates. Polite, predictable, distant. She started going to bed earlier than me. Just exhausted, she'd say, rubbing her temples like it was the stress talking, not the guilt. I'd stay downstairs a little longer, sometimes with a drink, sometimes just sitting in the dark with the TV on low. I wasn't watching it. I just needed noise, something other than the silence between us. On weekends, we stopped making plans. No more brunches or farmers markets or lazy Saturday hikes. She'd get dressed and head out around noon, saying she needed to run errands or wanted to get ahead on work. I never asked where she was going. She never offered. Sometimes she came home with shopping bags. Sometimes she didn't come home until late. But no matter what, she always kissed me on the cheek when she walked through the door. Like that would make it normal again. There was one Sunday afternoon I remember clearly, because it was almost normal. We were both home, the weather was decent, and we ended up in the backyard. She was trimming the plants, talking about how the roses were finally blooming again. I sat on the porch steps, sipping my coffee, listening. And for a moment it felt like the old version of us. She turned to me and smiled, really smiled, and I felt a weird ache in my chest. Not because I believed it, but because I knew she did. She believed that if she smiled enough, if she watered the flowers and made small talk about the weather, maybe I'd forget. Maybe the old version of us would return just like that. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The memory of that kiss in the rain, her hand on someone else's chest, was burned too deeply into my mind. And so I just nodded and said, "Yeah, looks good." She turned back to her flowers. I didn't say anything else. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was the routine. How easily the human brain accepts pain when it becomes familiar. How a wound can become just another part of your morning. Some nights, I'd lie awake and listen to her breathing beside me. I'd study the rise and fall of her chest, the way she shifted in her sleep. I used to find comfort in that. Now it just reminded me how far apart we were. How I didn't know who she was anymore. One night around 2 a.m., she stirred and rolled over, curling into my side. Instinctively, I froze. "You okay?" She mumbled, eyes still closed. "Yeah," I said. She wrapped an arm around me and whispered, "Miss you." I didn't reply. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. I started noticing things I hadn't seen before, like how her phone never left her side. Not for a second. If she left the room, it came with her. If she showered, it stayed on the sink. If it buzzed, she checked it instantly, always with a smile she tried to hide. Sometimes she'd turn away from me while typing, her shoulders stiff like she was aware of my presence. She changed her password at some point. I never asked why. There was also the new perfume. Again, not the one from before, the anniversary scent I had given her, but something even stronger, bolder. She said she'd picked it up on sale, wanted to try something different. "You like it?" she asked one night, standing at the edge of the kitchen. I nodded. "It's different." She smiled, satisfied. I wanted to scream. We stopped touching each other. That was maybe the most obvious change. No more hands grazing in the hallway. No more casual back rubs on the couch. No more goodnight kisses unless she initiated them, and even then it felt mechanical. Obligatory. I started using the guest bathroom more. She noticed. "You don't shave in here anymore," she said one morning. "Just trying to give you space," I replied. She blinked like she didn't understand what that meant. Of course she didn't. In her mind, we were still functioning, still stable, still fine, because I hadn't made a scene, because I hadn't left. People started asking questions. My sister called one evening. "You guys okay?" "Yeah, why?" "I don't know. Just feels like you've been distant lately. Haven't seen Nora at the last couple of family things." "She's been busy." Was all she said. A friend from work pulled me aside during lunch. "You sure everything's cool at home?" "Why? You just seem quiet." I shrugged it off, said I was just tired. I couldn't explain it. Not to them. Not yet. What was I going to say? That I was living with someone I no longer trusted? That we had stopped being a couple, but still pretended to be one in public? Even I couldn't fully explain it. One night, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, scrolling through old photos on the TV. Ones from our trip to Portland years ago. We were smiling, holding each other, standing on cliffs and kissing in front of waterfalls. I stood in the doorway watching. She didn't see me at first. When she did, she turned and said, "We were so happy then." "Yeah," I said quietly. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. I walked past her and went upstairs. I started leaving earlier in the mornings. Started staying later at work. I wasn't avoiding her, not exactly. I just needed air, real air. Place where I didn't have to pretend. Where I didn't have to measure every word, every glance, every breath. At night, when she was asleep, I would sit outside on the porch and scroll through rental listings on my phone. Small apartments, studios, even spare rooms on the other side of town. I wasn't ready to move. Not yet. But I was looking. Because I knew, deep down, that this couldn't go on. This performance. This muted half-life. We were ghosts haunting our own home. The strangest thing was how normal everything looked from the outside. If a stranger walked in, they'd see two people sharing a house, eating meals together, going to work, maintaining the appearance of a quiet, stable life. But they wouldn't see the way her eyes flickered when I walked into a room. They wouldn't see the way I flinched when she touched me. They wouldn't hear the sound of two people lying in bed inches apart, saying nothing. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't chaos. It was just silence. Every day, a little more space opened between us. And every day we stepped around it, careful not to fall in, careful not to name it, because once you name it, it's real. And once it's real, you have to do something about it. It took time to admit the truth, not about her, but about me. I had stayed. I hadn't exploded, hadn't demanded answers, hadn't left. Maybe I thought silence would force something to shift. Maybe I was waiting for her to confess, to snap out of whatever this was. But weeks passed, and nothing changed. She adjusted to the silence. She wore it like a coat, comfortable and familiar. And I just kept fading. At first, I thought the quiet was strength, that I was keeping things together, avoiding drama. But over time, I realized I wasn't avoiding conflict. I was avoiding myself. I come home and feel the weight in my chest grow heavier. The space between us wasn't neutral anymore. It was suffocating. One night, I stayed late at work, sitting in the empty break room, just staring at the wall. The idea of going home made my stomach turn. That's when it hit me. I was living in a house I no longer felt safe in. Not physically, but emotionally. I was walking on eggshells around a person who had already left me in every way that mattered. And worse, she was never going to leave on her own. She was too comfortable. As long as I stayed, she didn't have to choose. And as long as I avoided action, I was choosing for her. That was the night I stopped pretending I could endure this forever. It didn't end with a fight. No yelling. No accusations. I just told her I was done. Not because I hated her. Not to punish her. But because I couldn't keep living like I didn't matter. I told her I knew. That I had known for a long time. And that this silence, this ghost of a relationship, wasn't love. It was survival. And I was tired of surviving. She cried, said things I don't remember, promised to change, asked if we could fix it. But the truth was, it had already ended the night I watched her kiss someone else. Everything after that was just delay. She moved out a week later, and the house, once full of tension and lies, was finally quiet in a different way. Not hollow, free. And that's when I began to heal, not when she left, but when I stopped holding space for her lies.